All right, welcome to our free webinar, our October webinar. Today we are talking about the cubed, more in particular, progress monitoring with the cubed. We're going to go through the ins and outs of what to do with progress monitoring, what you're able to progress monitor, frequency of progress monitoring, all of the things. There are so many frequently asked questions, and we really wanted to be able to tackle most of those here. Now, with that being said, for those of you who are here live, please feel free to throw questions in our Q&A section or mention something in the chat, and I will get to them as I am able. I'll also have a chunk of time at the end to be able to answer any questions you might have, whether they are specific to your organization or you're just trying to get to know the cubed itself. Either of those is absolutely fine. So we will just go with the flow, see how you guys are. But yeah, please do not hesitate to ask any questions because chances are a lot of other people could benefit from the same questions. So with that being said, I will go ahead and introduce myself. I am Kristi Jones. I am a Dissemination and Implementation Specialist here at Language Dynamics Group. I've been here for a little over a year, working exclusively for the company. But a little bit about my background. So before getting into working with Language Dynamics Group, I actually worked closely with Dr. Douglas Peterson. I got to meet him in my undergraduate education at Brigham Young University, where he was my language science professor. And he taught me grammar and all those things at 8 a.m. every morning. And I got to get into his research and quickly fell in love with it. Loved everything that research was encompassing. Shortly after, he asked me to join his leadership team, and I started managing all of his research projects there at Brigham Young University. Now let's spin through a few years, and after my education there at BYU, he then moved on to University of Wyoming, where his research was able to expand greatly, and he asked me to continue to manage projects. And so I gladly accepted that. And part of that job was working on the cubed, where I got to take a lot of my time looking through the old version of the cubed, making revisions, and a big portion of my job was actually writing the progress monitoring stories. I had a little team. We spent painstaking hours trying to meet all of the parameters that go into making these progress monitoring stories, writing the questions, making sure the right amount of vocabulary was embedded, all of the things. It's a very, very extensive process, let me tell you. But that was a huge portion of my research job, in addition to a lot of other projects and partnerships. But now that this and a few other things are either published or are about to be published, I now get to work for LDG to help disseminate and help you all learn how to use these amazing tools. And it is with great joy that I get to see these revisions actually published on paper or digital, and I get to see it delivered into your hands for actual use and application in your many, many settings that are needing these kinds of tools. So that is my background. But my role here especially is to not only teach you about this now, but I am here as a resource for you now and always. My email is directly right here. We also have a training email that I will refer you to at the end. But if you have any questions specifically about Cubed, about the online platform that we have of the Cubed, the subscription, which we call Insight, if you've got some questions about applying these things into your own practice, into your school, making strategies for implementation, I am your girl. I'm here for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. I am so happy to help you figure this out. It's a big undertaking, and it's a huge part of my job, which I deeply love. So let's talk about our agenda for today. We're going to go, first of all, through how to access the cubed if you haven't already. If you have, sit back. You can just, take a minute, do some scrolling, whatever you need to do to decompress from your day. But we'll talk about how to access the cube, make sure that you have the right resources. We'll talk about who should be progress monitored. So what populations are we targeting here? What can we progress monitor with the cubed? Where do we even start? We're going to talk about using off-grade level material. talk about frequency of progress monitoring, and some data interpretation to help inform instruction. So let's start with accessing the cubed. If you haven't already, please head to our website and go ahead and access the cubed there. It is a free download. I'm going to put these links into the chat as I'm able. Let me just pull it up here. All right. Oh no, it's not coming through. I will go ahead and attach it at the end. I don't want to spend too much time trying to copy all my links here. But you can even just Google CUBED-3 download and it'll take you right here, languagedynamicsgroup.com. You can download it entirely for free, including all protocols, all student stimulus materials, and the manual. If you have an older version of the Cubed, and by that I mean 2020 or older, I highly encourage you, in fact, please, I beg you to go ahead and just lovingly put those versions aside and use the most recent version, which is the CUBED-3. It was released 2023. If you're using old record forms, those are outdated. They are no longer the most up to date. They are no longer the most research based. While they are research based, this new version is all the more valid and reliable. So please be sure that you have access to the most updated and correct forms available to you. And if you know anyone else who has been utilizing the Cubed for a while, encourage them to do the same. And if you download it straight from our website, then we'll be able to have your email on file to let you know if we make any other changes in the near future. That way we can say, hey, by the way, something either in the manual or protocol has changed because this is a research-based assessment. We are constantly working to make it the best it can be, which means revisions. And revisions will happen. They happen all the time. That's why this is the CUBED-3. It's the third version. So please make sure that you are doing that through our website so we can let you know if and when changes happen, and that you can always have the most up-to-date version on file. Now, we do have an online subscription base platform for the Cubed. This is not free. Like I said, subscription based, and we have a few different user types, whether you're an individual practitioner working in private practice, or you are in a school or a district, you have a large organization, we've got different subscription bases to suit your needs. But the online version allows for a lot more flexibility and a lot more automation. It makes administration a bit quicker, easier. Scoring is a little more automated. There are audio recording and transcription features. And there's a lot of reporting features. We'll look at a little bit of that today of progress graphs that you're able to compile within Insight. So if you are interested in that, you can scan this here, or also just head to our website to find more information. So first I want to talk about who we should even be progress monitoring. That's the first question we need to ask, right? Who is eligible? When is it useful? And when is it necessary to truly progress monitor? Because even though you may want to progress monitor every kiddo in your classroom, you may not have the time or the bandwidth for that. So we really want to make sure that this is for the kids who are really needing that direct feedback. First of all, we want to progress monitor students who are identified as moderate to high risk on a benchmark of the CUBED-3. On any of those subtests, we've got, the NLM and the DDM. We'll talk about each of those subtests. But if they are labeled at moderate to high risk or below benchmark, then there is likely a need for some progress monitoring. Because if they are labeled at moderate to high risk, they are likely going to receive small group or individual instruction for those particular things that they are struggling with. Now, especially if they are in this setting, you absolutely want to progress monitor. That's the only way you're going to know if intervention is even working. It's going to give you direct feedback and inform your instruction on if things should change or stay the same. It will help you answer the questions of, is this intervention working? Should complexity be increased or should it be simplified? A lot of these vital questions that you may be able to understand slightly in sessions themselves, but you may need a little something extra to help you answer those questions. So frequently monitoring progress is going to be the best way to make that happen. So what are the things that we can progress monitor using the CUBED-3? Well, that's going to encompass language comprehension and word recognition. Every single subtest within the cubed that you're able to utilize for benchmarking, you can also utilize for progress monitoring. It's a wonderful thing. We've got the NLM listening and NLM reading forms to progress monitor for language comprehension. So under this language comprehension strand, we've got NLM listening, that's for preschool through 3rd grade. We have 16 alternate progress monitoring forms for each grade, which means 16 unique stories per grade. So the preschool ones are not the same as the kindergarten ones. They are all different stories. As well as NLM reading, we've got 1st through 3rd grade with 16 alternate forms for each grade. While we have benchmarking for grades 4 through 8, we do not have progress monitoring forms available yet. That will be coming sometime next year. Myself and one of my wonderful colleagues, Cameron Ledditch, we are working on getting those written. It's a long process. So we're working on drafting those right now. We're nearing the end of drafting, but the design process and the editing process takes quite a bit of time. So those are coming. And if you have any issues with wanting to access or make a plan for your upper grade kiddos, go ahead and reach out to me. I'm happy to help. As I know it is definitely useful to have those forms for those upper grades. But again, we are working on those. They will be coming soon. We also have progress monitoring to cover word recognition. This is for all of the dynamic decoding measure subtests. So orthographic mapping, decoding inventory, phonemic awareness, and phoneme manipulation. However, we do not have any alternate forms for any of these subtests, and that's due to the unlikelihood of a child actually being able to memorize the targets and tasks, which are pretty obscure for these, especially with phoneme manipulation and phonemic awareness. The dynamic decoding inventory is all nonsense words, and then orthographic mapping is just being able to read off irregular words and letter sounds, letter names, and the order is random. So doesn't necessitate a lot of alternate forms for that purpose. But this is everything that we have access to. Again, if you download the Cubed, you will see when you open up that file, you'll see a subfolder for benchmarking and a subfolder for progress monitoring. Hit that one, and that's where you'll see all of this. So let's talk about where we start. Where do we even start when we want to know if a kiddo needs to be progress monitored? The answer is simple. It's benchmarking. We want to start with the benchmark. We have beginning, middle, and end of year benchmarks, and you want to select the grade level benchmark that is appropriate for the time of year for the student you are benchmarking. For reference, the beginning of the year is the first 1.5 to 2 months of the year. Middle of year will be those middle 2 months of the year, and then the end of year is the last approximately 1.5 months of the school year. If you are in the US or Australia, it doesn't matter. I know we've got a lot of people all over the world, and so our school years are very different. I know if you're in Australia, you're going to start up your new school year within January, February. That is the beginning of year. You can use our beginning of year data for that time. That is absolutely fine. It does not change the expectations, the scoring, or the benchmarking, even though our timelines are a little bit different. The data remains consistent. So you can have confidence in that. So select the benchmark that you need to utilize. So let's say that we're going to start with benchmarking after this holiday break. We're going to start with that middle of year benchmark if you're here on the US side. And then if we're in Australia, we want to start with beginning of year, right? So we want to start with benchmarking because benchmarking will tell us where the child is performing compared to those grade level expectations. Once we know whether they are below benchmark and to what degree, we can then make decisions about progress monitoring. Now, I want to really, really, really emphasize here, we want to use the grade level benchmark. If you have a child that you know is not performing at grade level, it does not matter. You still want to administer that grade level benchmark because that's going to help you understand to which degree, like how below benchmark are they? Is it a moderate moderately below? Are they very, very below in that high risk level? How are they able to respond within a retell in particular for the NLM? We want to understand how much of a story can they really retell to me given a story that is per their grade level. And we'll look at those degrees of complexity that you'll see there in a minute. We always want to start with the on grade level material. Now that only applies for NLM listening and NLM reading. The DDM, the forums look the same for all grades, so that makes that really easy. Some targets are more appropriate to give to higher grades than others, and that is indicated on the protocol form. But for the NLMs, for listening and reading, we want to start with grade level appropriate forms. That's going to give you your baseline, your foundation. As seen here, this is part of the overview graph that you see for an individual student, and it'll tell you right off the cuff if they are in that benchmark category, moderate risk, or high risk. Where do they lie along this spectrum? This will help you to understand what grade level of progress monitoring to utilize. You can always use off-grade level material for progress monitoring, but remember, please remember to always start with that on-grade level benchmark so that you know how below grade to go. So the higher the grade level, the more academically complex the story is within the NLM. And so if a child is performing well below grade levels, let's say they're at high risk, then we will likely want to progress monitor them at a lower grade level. So if we've got a third grader who was at high risk and is really, really struggling with that task, then maybe we want to tone it back to a first grade progress monitoring form to help simplify the story that they are listening to or reading, and gives them a little less to focus on than some of those upper grade stories. And again, it's all about meeting them at their zone of proximal development. We want to make sure that we are progress monitoring them at the level that they are receiving instruction. So if they're receiving instruction in a lower grade level, then we likely want to progress monitor them at a lower grade level rather than taking them right back up to that grade level expectation progress monitoring form, because that may be overwhelming for them. If they're receiving instruction in this more simplified story grammar level or whatever it is you're focusing on in intervention, if that is more simplified than the test you're giving, that test will be overwhelming and they may not perform as well as they would on something that's toned back and matches their intervention. So let's talk about the different levels of complexity that we see within our NLMs. I'm going to show you 3 of the different NLM progress monitoring stories across 3 different grades so that we see how they change regarding length, story grammar, complex academic language, and what have you. So first, we've got the first grade NLM. I believe this is from just the first progress monitoring story. So I'm just going to read this story through. And over here on the bottom, you're going to probably recognize these icons. They are pulled from Story Champs. They are displayed on the protocols in the narrative discourse structure table as you're scoring. But we're going to go through and will I be able to identify a character, a setting, a problem, a feeling, plan to solve the problem, the action, the consequence, the ending, and the end feeling. So I'll go ahead and read through this story and we'll listen to this. So last week, Rose was in the back of a van with her sister. Rose's sister kept looking at her, but Rose did not want her to keep looking. She was mad. Then Rose asked her mom for help. Rose said, "My sister keeps looking at me and I do not like it. Can you please tell her to stop staring at me?" Rose's irritated mom turned around and said to the twin girls, who were born at the same time and looked almost exactly the same, "Listen, you two, just look out your side window. Both of you do it now because I'm extremely tired of all your bickering." Then both girls gazed out their windows, which helped pass the time. When they looked outside, they saw the scenery that was beautiful as they continued down the street. Rose was happy because her annoying sister wasn't bothering her anymore. After they looked out the window for a while, the girls started politely talking to each other so that they didn't get bored. Very relatable story to anybody who's got siblings. That's what I love about these. So this is fairly simple. We've got a little bit of complex academic language. We have some great use of subordinate clauses. And this is our story structure, right? We've got Rose, who is in the back of the van with her sister. The problem, her sister kept looking at her and she didn't like it, feeling it made her mad. She decided to talk to her mom. And then she asked her mom for help and said, my sister keeps looking at me. I don't like it. The consequence is that their mom said, stop looking at each other, look out the windows. And so that's what they did. And then it ended with them politely talking to each other, and Rose was happy. So there's our first grade NLM. This is what they're going to be exposed to. Now remember that the first grade benchmark expectations aren't going to be expecting a first grader to tell every single part of the story with perfection, right? That's not necessarily what we're looking for, but this is what we give them exposure to, and the benchmarking will adjust accordingly. Now let's compare this to a third grade NLM, shall we? In third grade, we get a little bit longer in the story and we have more story grammar. This actually starts in second grade, this increase in story grammar. We have gone from a single episode story to a dual episode story. So here we've got a problem, or we've got a character, setting, problem, feeling, a plan to solve the problem, the action, and a failed consequence. So we've tried to solve the problem, but it didn't work. So there's another feeling, and then a new plan and attempt to solve the problem with a positive or successful consequence, an ending, and an end feeling. So we'll go ahead and walk through this story so you get an idea. On Wednesday, Tess got into a big crowded bus at school so that she could go on a field trip. They were driving to a large greenhouse, which is a warm, enclosed building where plants are grown. When it was lunchtime, Tess looked for her yummy lunch that should have been in her backpack, but she couldn't find it because she accidentally left it at home. Then she felt sad. Tess thought that her friend could help her. She sheepishly asked if her friend could share her lunch. Tess's friend told her she had already eaten her lunch, and Tess was pretty distressed. She decided to ask her teacher, who always attended to her students' needs, if she could help. Tess shyly said, "I forgot my lunch. What should I do?" Tess's teacher kindly said, "I always bring an extra lunch since someone usually forgets." After they strolled to the big yellow bus that was in the parking lot, Tess's teacher found the spare lunch. Although Tess didn't have her own lunch, she felt relieved because she could finally eat. Her teacher's donated lunch was delicious. So as you can see here, we've got a little more to focus on. That increase to that dual episode brings a lot more complexity to that story grammar. And this is what I mean if we're working with a third grader who can hardly piece together part of the story. Let's say they are hardly giving us a character and a problem. They skip the first episode entirely and they just move on to the second one. We're going to find some concern. If they've got that moderate to high risk score, they're skipping part of the episode, then maybe having a dual episode story in their progress monitoring is not going to be helpful. Maybe we need to tone it back to first grade where it's a single episode story. We've decreased that complexity and stripped it back a little bit to focus on some more basic level story grammar. I also notice that there is still a great amount of modifiers in here. We've got causal and temporal connections all throughout this story, lots of tier 2 vocabulary. These stories are very, very rich in those things. If you are a user of Story Champs, you will see complete similarities to those stories because of that level of rich, complex academic language. So that's another reason why we might want to tone it back. Sometimes having that density of complex academic language might be difficult for a student who is really struggling with story retells. Story retells are what we want to really establish first before overlaying that sentence complexity, that vocabulary complexity. So if they can't even have that, then we really want to tone it back to just focusing on story structure and have that really reflected in their progress monitoring. All right, now we're going to jump all the way to 8th grade. Okay, are we ready? It's going to be a lot. 8th grade is very long. You'll notice that the story grammar is actually the exact same as 3rd grade. So as we move up the grades from 3rd to 4th, 5th to 6th to 7th to 8th, it gradually gets longer while still maintaining the same degree of story grammar. There's no extra episode, no extra story grammar inserted here. It is just this, but the way it's delivered is more complicated. So I will go ahead and read through this one. On Monday, Brody was in the school cafeteria with his friends. While he was eating, he noticed that there was a boy sitting by himself at another table. Brody felt sad for the boy. Without a moment's thought, Brody, who was a kind, considerate boy, decided that he would try to befriend the other boy by bringing his friends over to meet him. However, when Brody and his friends tried to introduce themselves, the boy wouldn't talk to them and remained mute, even though Brody and his friends kept trying to start a conversation. Brody felt disappointed because he still wanted to become friends with the boy. He wasn't sure what to try next, so he decided to ask for advice from his teacher, who was extremely wise. My friends and I are trying to be friends with the boy who is sitting alone, but he's as quiet as a mouse. What are we doing wrong? Brody's teacher said you should probably try talking to him one-on-one, which is a more personal way to introduce yourself individually. Plus, meeting lots of people at once could be overwhelming for him, especially if he's an introvert. He may be more willing to talk with just you at first. The teacher explained to him that an introvert is a person that doesn't enjoy crowds. She explained that introverts often like to have a small, close group of friends and sometimes prefer to simply enjoy the peace and quiet of being alone. That makes sense, Brody said after he thought it over. I'll give it a try. The next day at lunch, Brody approached the boy alone and introduced himself. This time, the shy boy engaged in conversation with him. Eventually, the boy came out of his shell enough that the two of them were able to become well acquainted. Brody was thrilled that he had made a new friend. So hopefully you're able to see how this has increased in complexity. The story structure again has remained the same, but the sentences are a lot more rich in subordinate clauses. Some have double to triple subordinate clauses. There's an increase in figurative language. We have more tier 2 vocabulary, lots more modifiers, all of that. So all of our stories, for example, have a little line about some type of expository information. So comparing here, our expository piece, let's see here. Yeah, our expository piece is about scenery. They looked outside and they saw the scenery that was beautiful. And then, oh no, sorry, that's not what we have here. The twins, twin girls who were born at the same time and looked almost exactly the same. That is our tier 3 word is twin, and we've got 2 sporting details about that. So that's very, very short. Twin girls who were born at the same time looked almost exactly the same. In 3rd grade, we have, let's see through here. We've got a greenhouse. It says a large greenhouse, which is a warm enclosed building where plants are grown. Then when we get to 8th grade, we get to introvert. We've got like 3 complete sentences about introverts. So the amount of information that is being given to convey the story is much greater in these instances. So as we increase the grade, we are going to increase that complexity, the length. I kind of like to call it story fluff. The story fluff, it gets greater. You know, we've got more words being used to convey an idea. So if we have a learner who, if we have an 8th grader, for example, who is hardly producing a single episode story, you think progress monitoring them with a story like this is going to be beneficial? Probably not. We want to tone it back big time, really strip it away so that they are not overwhelmed by the amount of information and they can focus on building what needs to be built, which is story structure, and then that sentence and vocab complexity and so forth. So how do you even know which grade level to use? It's a great question, and some of it does require a little bit of trial and error. It completely depends on your learner's needs. And if you've never worked with them in intervention, you may not be able to know exactly how they're going to respond after they've been explicitly taught story grammar and narrative intervention in general. So what do you do? Well, first, it's going to depend on the severity of the risk identified by the benchmark. If we've got a kiddo who is at moderate risk, they may be able to get by with grade level material. It entirely depends. If they are kind of borderline for high risk to moderate risk, maybe we want to tone it back a little bit. You want to refer to the retell score in particular and look at their retell and the narrative discourse complexity. What parts of the story were they able to successfully include on their own? How much of the story is missing? Do they have a minimally complete episode? And that means, do they include a problem, attempt, consequence, and ending. Those are the 4 pieces of information that we as listeners must know about a story in order to actually comprehend what's going on. It's nice to know the character and the setting and the feelings, but the most pertinent information is going to be those 4 pieces: problem, attempt, consequence, ending. If that is missing, we really need to tone things back, because that is the most basic foundation of these narratives. You also want to refer to the story questions, right? The factual questions. Those are the WH questions with who is the character, where was the character in the story, what was the problem, and goes through each piece. If they're able to at least answer those questions, then we know that they are still comprehending it to a degree. They may just need help telling stories. And so maybe we can still maintain the same level of progress monitoring at their grade level. If, however, they are struggling even with prompted questions, then that is another sign that you want to take it back a level or 2. You also want to evaluate, after you've been able to do intervention, how a student actually responds to that intervention. Are they very responsive to your prompting? Are they able to formulate somewhat of a retell, or is it extremely laborious? If it's really laborious and it requires a lot of prompting, then we want to use a well below grade level progress monitoring form. So that, again, we are not overloading them with the information and thus discouraging them when they go to the retell. If you are using story champs in particular, it makes it a little bit easier to understand which grade level to use. As you know, or as you should hopefully are well aware of, story champs and the cubed give direct feedback about each other. So story champs, as you provide intervention with it, you're going to be providing intervention at some type of grade level. Now, if you have your kit, there's a little quick start guide in there. It gives you a scope and sequence for preschool through 3rd grade. And if you know that your kiddos need to be receiving intervention on a level B story, that's using just above basic story grammar, that's enhanced story grammar, and it's a single episode story. If your learner is working at that level and is only working on a single episode story, then that means we want to use a 1st grade progress monitoring form, because that is a single episode story. If they are working at a basic story grammar level, that is level A, we may even want to use a preschool or kindergarten form for the NLM listening, because it is that simplified. So refer to the quick start guide in your kit and figure out, first of all, which level are they receiving intervention for? Where are they performing? Which level of story are they the most responsive to? And then you can look at the quick start guide and see which grade level that aligns with, and you can then choose that corresponding grade level for progress monitoring. So overall, based on what you're doing in intervention, select that corresponding grade level for progress monitoring, and vice versa. You should be able to use both to give information about one another. So let's have a mini case study per se. Let's say we have a 4th grade student who is at high risk in the retell portion of the NLM reading. So there are minimal episodic elements included in the retell. And remember, refresher, episodic elements means problem, action, consequence, ending. So minimal episodic elements, little to no vocabulary or academic language, and the student requires repeated prompting and intervention. I would want to take this back to a kindergarten or 1st grade level. Now, here's the nice thing. There's no harm in taking it too simple to start, right? If we use a progress monitoring form that is well below grade level and they seem to do great, awesome. That means you get to up the complexity a little bit, right? If we give a 1st grade level story and this kiddo knocks it out of the park, then all right, let's move on to 2nd grade. Let's do a dual episode story and see how they do there. If they do great there, great. Let's move up to 3rd grade where the academic language starts to increase and the length of the story increases as well. And you can gradually move up that complexity. Now, I also want to encourage that you should never stay on a low level of progress monitoring for too long. if you have a student who is doing well and progressing in intervention, they should also be progressing through levels of progress monitoring. You don't want to keep them at a first or second grade level if they are now progressing more towards their grade level, right? You want to keep increasing that complexity over time, just like you do in intervention. So next question, how often should we be progress monitoring? This has a lot of sub-questions to it. You're going to want to know the following. First of all, what is the frequency or intensity of the intervention? Are they receiving small group intervention, large group intervention, one-on-one? What does that look like? How many times per week are they receiving intervention? How long are the sessions? If we've got a kiddo who's receiving small group intervention once a week for 30 minutes, then we likely do not need to progress monitor very often. Maybe every 3 weeks or so. But if we've got a learner who is receiving intervention 2, 3, 4 times a week, and it's about 30 minutes per session, they're receiving very, very frequent amounts of intervention, then we want to progress monitor frequently, every 1 to 2 weeks. This also can depend on your organization. Some organizations already have testing schedules built in and you're confined to that. That's okay. If that's how you need to plan, then that's how you need to plan. But as long as progress monitoring can happen throughout the year in between those benchmarking seasons, by all means, please do utilize that. You also want to reflect on how the child seems to be doing in the intervention sessions. If it seems that intervention is too easy for a child or no progress seems to be made, time to monitor progress. This data is going to inform you if instruction is working or if something needs to be changed. You want this to all be, directly reflective of what you are doing in intervention and making sure that your intervention is being informed by the data that you are frequently gathering in your progress monitoring. Progress monitoring is never going to be harmful because the more data you gather, the more information you will have to help you understand if instruction should remain the same or if it should change, whether that means we're simplifying things or it's time to up the complexity, because we never want to stay on something that just isn't working, right? So I want to talk about some progress graphs. Now, Insight compiles progress graphs for your individual student. And this happens for every single subtest of the cubed. Now, the NLM is what I'm going to showcase here. But I want to orient you to this graph here. So here we've got the scores up here on our y-axis, and on the x-axis, we've got the dates as well as the benchmarks. These columns here represent each time of year. So we've got our beginning of year benchmark, middle of year benchmark, and end of year benchmark. The red is going to be high risk. The yellow, orangish color is moderate risk. Green is at benchmark, and this tiny bit of blue is advanced. So we are going to be able to see plotted here how the learner did on their benchmark. So you can see at the beginning of year, this learner got about a 6 for their retail score, which is high risk. And then all the way up here, we've got on this circle about a 20, which is just on the border of moderate risk and high risk for the middle of year. Now, these boxes that have been plotted in between are our progress monitoring forms. These will be plotted on here regardless of the grade level you use. So for this particular learner, if they're using a 3rd grade benchmarking and then 1st grade progress monitoring, it will still show just like this. It does not matter if you are using multiple different grade levels for progress monitoring, all of that data will show up on here. As you go, you'll be able to see how the progress is trending over time. If you hover over one of the boxes, you'll be able to see their score, the date of the test, as well as the time of year, which only applies to benchmarking. But you also see the test name. So here we've got NLM reading progress monitoring number 3 for 1st grade right here. So that means we've got 1st grade number 1, 1st grade number 2, 1st grade number 3. And then if we change to using 2nd grade progress monitoring, you would also see those additional plots on the graph. This will help you understand a few things. You'll be able to see how they're trending towards their grade level expectations, but also in general, as they are utilizing their appropriate progress monitoring form, whatever that looks like, you'll be able to see how progress is trending overall. So a quick recap. We want to start with benchmarking, first of all. We want to be able to select the appropriate progress monitoring level based off of how they did in benchmarking. We want to make sure we are monitoring progress frequently according to the frequency of instruction. If they are frequently receiving instruction, they should frequently be progress monitored. We want to make sure that we're adjusting complexity as needed for both progress monitoring and instruction. And then we want to interpret the data to inform instruction. So if we are noticing on this trend line, say we've got a bit of a flat line here, that means that instruction is clearly not working. Maybe it's too complicated and we need to tone it back a level. So we simplify instruction and then hopefully we can see some upward movement. If it's starting to go down, then we definitely need to change something, right? We want to be able to see some degree of upward progress. And if that is not being seen, then we need to decrease complexity, tone it back, simplify it within the context of instruction. And being able to visualize it on a progress graph like this is a really great way to do so. So there you have it. That is, in a nutshell, progress monitoring with the cubes. Now, I know this is not a full-fledged how-to of how to use the assessments themselves. If that is something that you are particularly interested in, I highly encourage you to enroll in our training course for the CUBED-3. It is entirely asynchronous, and if you're not completely bothered by me, I'm one of the facilitators of that course. So you will see a lot of me there. It is a 7-hour course that you can complete on your own time. It walks through the ins and outs of every single subtest. It gives you multiple opportunities for scoring, practice, and application. There's a lot of active student responding questions for you to make sure that you have guided note taking. There's a manual that is written out for you, or a little handbook to help you take guided notes. It's a wonderful course. We just converted from our live courses to this asynchronous module, and I highly recommend it. It's a great way to get you feeling confident with the cubed and making sure that you're able to give the test with fidelity. Okay, do we have any questions about any part of progress monitoring or the cubed? Feel free to throw it in the chat or in the Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. In the meantime, as you are thinking of questions, I'm going to throw a few more links into the chat. This next one I'm going to send, and if you are viewing this recording on our YouTube page, this will be in the description of our video. So head to that for all of these different links. But this next one I'm going to put in here is for subscribing to Insight or downloading the Cubed for free. So make sure that you have access to that. Oh, yes, great question, Patrice. Patrice asked, does the NLM have any visual support for the students, like pictures or story element icons? Yes, we do. I'll actually pull those up on my end and I'll share my screen a little bit. Just give me a quick moment. But our preschool forms have this option. Preschool is the only level that we have, we actually have this available. Let me just pull it up one moment. All right, preschool illustrations. So it's very much like what you can see in Story Champs. It's not any icons, but it is pictures. So I will go ahead and just share my screen very briefly. Moment. Okay, here we are. Here you are. So if you look in the benchmarking materials or the progress monitoring materials, make sure you find the student stimulus subfolder. and then you should see the illustration sets. So you'll be able to show these for preschool level stories. We do not have this available for the older levels. So if you have a learner who would really benefit from illustrations, by all means, utilize preschool level. There's no shame in that. These need to be used to meet your student where they're at. So if this is where they're at, then provide it by all means. And we also have this available for the preschool Spanish forms. So that is available to you. Someone asked, is there a bilingual version of the NLM? Right now, we only have the Spanish versions of the preschool forms. We do not have any other forms for that or any other languages yet. If you are interested in perhaps helping us be able to generate those, please reach out to me. That's something that's on our radar that we would like to expand on when we are able. But right now we've only got English and then those preschool Spanish forms. Great question. Let me go back to the presentation one moment. There we go. Okay, we have another question. So it says, when doing progress monitoring, would the benchmark score of that year level be the same for progress monitoring? For example, for the reading assessment in year 1, the NLM retail benchmark score is 12. The student score is 12 in progress monitoring. Is it safe to assume their retail is at benchmark? Hope that makes sense. That totally makes sense. So benchmarking is we only give benchmark scores to the benchmarks themselves. Progress monitoring does not have any risk cut points or particular benchmark scores, right? Because the purpose of progress monitoring is just referring those scores to what the student is capable of doing. We want to track their progress in relation to themselves. Now, that being said, you can still compare those scores to the benchmark. So looking back on our little progress graphs, let me pull that up again really quick. Here. So we would be able to see here, okay, benchmark is about 32 here, and then benchmark here is 35. So if we are tracking on an upward scale ever so slightly, and their score is somewhere between 32 and 35 between these two times of years, then we can absolutely assume that they are at benchmark, right? Even though there is not an actual benchmark score. So that's what makes these nice, is you can see where they are trending. Are they maintaining in that benchmark level or not? Great question. Okay, Kim has asked, is there a flow chart to follow as to where you begin where to begin assessment? Kim, if I can have you expound on that a little bit, do you mean like when in the year to start beginning assessment, or what in particular do you mean by that? If you can expand on that on the chat. Now I could pull something up from the cubed manual. Well, I mean, I don't know if that graphic would really be super helpful, but the graphic essentially shows the MTSS roadmap, and that's talking about when to actually give assessment. But Kim, you're referring to which assessment to start with. That is a great question. I will pull up the little administration flowcharts that we have in the manual, and that will certainly help answer this question. This is something we really dive into in the CUBED course, where to start with testing, which test to start with. So let me just go ahead and pull those up and we can look at them together. Okay, so if you open the manual, you will notice on page 19, we have administration flowcharts. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. Here in the manual, we've got administration flowcharts. Now I'm going to go down to, let's go ahead and do first grade. First grade, we're always going to start with this NLM reading. NLM reading is going to be the start for first grade and onward, because the NLM reading gives you information about word recognition and language comprehension. Because we're doing that decoding fluency portion as well as the retell and questions. It's going to hit all of those things. So if a student is at benchmark for everything in the NLM reading, then we're done. There's nothing else that needs to be given. However, you'll notice these arrows here, the suggested target if the subtest is not at benchmark. It's our red arrow here. So if we are not at benchmark with the decoding fluency, then it's time to go into the DDM. And let's go into those subtests and figure out where in the decoding fluency, where in their decoding ability are they having a difficult time. Now, if we're having a difficult time with the comprehension side of things, let's do an NLM listening. Let's strip away the reading portion and just have it all completely just an oral retell from the examiner or an oral reading. They'll be able to listen to the story and then they retell themselves without having to read anything. So that's what you'll always start with. And then this is the flow of administration that is recommended for the DDM. It doesn't have to be this way. The DDM is a lot more flexible. You can give whichever one you want or as much or as little as you would like. But it is recommended for first grade and above to start with the NLM reading. For kindergarten and preschool, it's okay if you do the DDM or the NLM listening first. It doesn't quite matter because their scores are not as contingent upon one another. But great question. If you want more information about that, please make sure you go to and check out our course for the CUBED. It is extremely helpful and we'll talk through all of those questions. I'm going to throw one more thing in the chat. If you have another question, please do throw it in there. But in the chat, I am going to throw in a Google form for you to fill out for a certificate of attendance. If you would like a certificate to report that you have attended here, you'll just want to go through, answer that you joined the webinar, what date, and then give any feedback if you have any, and then that will generate a little certificate for you that will be emailed to you. If you are, again, watching our recording, just go to the description of the video and that link will be there. All right, another question. How many assessments should a student go through in one sitting? Oh, great question. Depends on the student. You could do, hypothetically, all of those subtests in one sitting. Totally depends on the bandwidth of you and the student, how much time you have, how much patience the student has. If they need to do all of the DDM is fairly quick. It can last anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Those tasks are not very long at all, especially because some of them are timed to be only about 1 minute long. And then with the NLMs take about 5 to 7 minutes to administer. So all of those in one sitting can really add up. You know, we could be talking about up to 20 minutes of assessment. So if you think your learner can go through that many, then by all means, go for it. But if we're working with those younger learners in particular, that might be a little tricky. Might need to have a little wiggle break, right? Yeah, so you can, I have gone through and assessing a kid with the complete battery of the CUBED. It can be done. But again, totally depends on your bandwidth and the bandwidth of the student. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Now, as we are wrapping up, I will stay on just a little bit longer if you have any additional questions. If you want to look at any of our past recorded webinars, I'm going to throw that in the chat. Our YouTube page has all of our recorded webinars, so please refer to that. Oh, you're not seeing all of the links? Okay, hold on. Let me try this again. Here we go. So first one is going to be training. Here we go. I think I was able to fix that bug there. Sorry about that. You're probably like, where's this lady sending all of these links? What are you talking about? Okay. So first link is the training. Next is downloading the CUBED-3 or the subscription. There's our link there. Then we have our Google form for your certificate. There you go. And finally, our YouTube page. Okay, and we have one other question here. Daniel says, is there a year level scope and sequence for sound knowledge? For example, vowel teams in grade 1, complex vowels in year 2. So if you actually look over to our decoding inventory subtest. It actually tells you which targets are appropriate for which grade levels and which time of year, which will kind of act as your scope and sequence. The first few targets are okay for first grade, and then not till I think the first one's kindergarten, and then it goes into middle or end of your first grade and the middle of your second grade. So we don't necessarily have a complete document for that, but it is documented on the protocol itself. So definitely refer to that. Okay. Yeah, I'll keep an eye out for any other questions. But if I do want to put in a plug for our next two webinars. Our next two webinars are actually going to be super exciting. Um, we are going to have in November a webinar with Dr. Douglas Peterson, and he's going to be talking about the diamond. The diamond has been a word that's been floating around for quite some time, and it is actually officially being published by the end of December. It will be at ASHA. If you're going to be there, I will be there. I would love to talk to you about it. He's going to finally talk about the diamond. It is a diagnostic assessment for kindergarten through 8th grade for dyslexia and developmental language disorder. It is a magnificent world-changing assessment, and we are very, very, very excited to finally see it come to fruition. So if you would like to learn more from its creator, that will be November 20th. Go to our socials so you can register for that. We'll be putting that out soon. And then December, we'll be talking more about the AAC Story Champs expansion with Dr. Trina Spencer and Dr. Megan Kirby. I'll be going into more of the research, answering any questions you have about it. So our next two webinars are stacked. They're going to be great. We're going to end the year with a bang. So keep an eye out for that. If you don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a lovely day. And if you celebrate, happy Halloween tomorrow. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it. You're welcome. Thanks, guys.